Last week, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the largest Black church denominations in the United States, called for an end to all military support for Israel. And they did so in very stark terms. So stark that I want to share with you the exact language of what they said. Council of Bishops calls for immediate support of financial support from Israel. Today, as we celebrate the birth of Richard Allen, the Apostle of Freedom, Israel has trapped 1.6 million desperate Palestinians in the southern Gaza city called Rafah. Most of them are women and children. They have denied them access to food, water, shelter, and healthcare. After this torture, they plan to murder them. The United States of America will have likely paid for the weapons they use. This must not be allowed to happen. And so the Council of Bishops calls on the United States government to immediately withdraw all funding and other support from Israel. Since 1954, Israel has shown a willful disregard. I don't know why they picked 54 out of all the years. The human dignity of Palestinians. Since October 7th, in retaliation for the brutal murder of Israeli citizens, Israel has murdered over 28,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. The United States is supporting this mass genocide. This must not be allowed to continue. And the next paragraph is a little more balanced. There must be an immediate and permanent ceasefire between these two communities. We call for a solution to be negotiated by genuine representatives of the people of Israel and Palestine and condemn all violence as a means of resolving this conflict. Surely there is a grassroots solution that affirms the dignity and humanity of all God's people in Palestine and Israel. The tools of empire, colonialism, and domination will not solve the problems they created. The cycle of violence between historically wounded peoples will not be dissolved by the creation of more wounds or through weapons of war. We remain in solidarity with Jesus Christ of Nazareth, a Palestinian Jew and the Prince of Peace. And so, wrapping up, we weep for the suffering being inflicted upon the children of God in the Holy Land and all the earth. We cry for freedom and implore those who say they love God to demonstrate a tangible love for their neighbors. So if you were evaluating this, you would say the latter two paragraphs seem balanced. They're calling for peace. They're asking for both sides to stop firing. But the first two paragraphs seem very stark, very accusatory, very, we would say, unbalanced. How did a statement like this come to be issued? How is it that the largest Black denomination in this country claims that Israel plans to murder 1.6 million people after torturing them intentionally, willfully? We've seen other incidents of tension between Black Americans and the Jewish community. There's an organization called the Black Hebrew Israelites. They are convinced that they are the true Israel, and white Jews are imposters, are frauds, are criminals. There was an attack on a Jewish school in New Jersey, Jersey City, New Jersey, by a Black Hebrew Israelite offshoot. We saw a recording artist who goes by the name Ye, formerly Kanye West, who shared rabidly anti-Semitic messages to his millions of Twitter followers, saying it was time to go DEFCON 4 against the Jews. We saw NBA star Kyrie Irving, while he was on the Brooklyn Nets, in Brooklyn of all places, share a video from the Black Hebrew Israelite movement claiming the Jews were liars and false. On October 7th and in the days afterwards, we saw some chapters of Black Lives Matter sharing memes and images and messages in support of Hamas, celebrating October 7th as an anti-colonialist uprising. And today we see active chapters in Black Lives Matter and other Black advocacy movements in support of a ceasefire and chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, we also see other Black institutions, other Black politicians, and other Black leaders who continue to support Israel, who speak out against anti-Semitism. Sometimes they take the message, it's the same people targeting us. Those white supremacists that are putting graffiti on Jewish institutions and are vandalizing Jewish cemeteries, they don't like Black people either. And so let's find common cause. I saw an article just last week about a project in Philadelphia where active leaders in the Jewish community and the Black community have come together to stand up against hate in any form. So there are these positive signs. It's not simply, pardon the phrase, a black or white issue. But we are certainly a long way from the 1963 March on Washington, where you may not know this, but the speaker immediately before Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was a Reform rabbi named Joachim Prinz. That's how close the alliance was for the civil rights movement. Now, when it comes to understanding put it this way, to understand how American Jews are understood in America by the Black community, we have to understand they could be one of four things. First, Jews could be considered as a people of color, or simply a not fully white minority. Maybe we're an off-white, or we're not fully accepted by the establishment. And as a not fully white minority, we face our own degree of oppression. A second possibility is that even if we are accepted as white, we can be allies to people of color, stand up for their needs, advocate for them. A third possibility is that American Jews could be understood to be part of the white establishment, and thus they benefit from what you might call structural racism. It's not intentionally racist, but there are benefits that come from being on the right side of that color ledger. And fourth, perhaps Jews are understood as being complicit and even active in white racism against people of color, particularly in an anti-colonialist lens. Now, how Jews see themselves and how other people see them may be very different, but they land somewhere along the spectrum. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the anti-colonial side, the racism side, a little bit later when I talk about number 4, this question of, are Jews complicit in these problems? But let's start with the first one. Are Jews non-white? And the first point I want to make to you is some Jews definitely are not white because they are both Jewish and people of color. So I want to share with you a short video of people who are Black and Jewish talking about what their lives are like.
We're Black and Jewish. When I talk about my hair care, I'm meaning it.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course I'm seasoning my food with an inch of its life. Come on.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course I celebrate Pesach and Juneteenth.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course I had my own egg after my bat mitzvah at the shul, and then the reception at Skateland.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course I have a Jufro.
We're Black and Jewish, so I fry my fried chicken with matzah meal.
I'm Black and Jewish. Davo and Challah sit side by side on my Shabbat table.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course you confuse me with that other Black and Jewish woman, even though we look absolutely positively nothing at all alike.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course my fashion can go from the synagogue to New York Fashion Week.
We're Black and Jewish. Of course we wear dashikis on Passover.
I'm Black and Jewish. Of course Black-Jewish relationships has been talking with myself.
We're Black and Jewish. Of course we're fabulous.
Stories of people who are Black and Jewish, right? They don't see a contradiction between their identities. And so we should never talk about issues like the relations between the Black community and the Jewish community as if there's no people who have a foot in both worlds. Some of these people have been raised as Jews. Some of them have a Jewish parent, and that's how they became connected. Some of them converted as adults or as children, but they feel authentically Jewish, and our approach is they've identified as Jewish. We welcome them as Jewish. They are Jewish. Now, the question is, how many Jews of color are there out there? How many people fit into that a foot in both worlds category? And to answer that, we actually have survey data that explains this from the Pew Forum's 2020 study of American Jews. So I'll just zoom in a little bit. Most American Jews identify as white and non-Hispanic. So overall, 92% of all Jews identify as white, about 1% as Black, 1% as white and black, 1% as white and Asian, a certain amount as Hispanic or Hispanic and white. But in general, the vast majority of American Jews do identify as white, whatever that means. Now, you could also ask, what kind of Jew are they? Are they Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews? And about 66% of American Jews identify as Ashkenazi Jews coming from Eastern Europe. But notice there's also 3% that are Sephardic, claiming roots in Spain, 1% Mizrahi, Middle Eastern, which would be my father's family coming from Syria, some combination of those. And there's 17% who they're just Jewish. They haven't picked an ethnic lane that they have to travel in, or they're maybe the child of intermarriage, they don't want to pick one. They converted, and you don't convert into Ashkenazi or convert into Sephardi, you just convert to being Jewish. So they haven't necessarily chosen an ethnic Jewish lane there. One of the challenges is how you define your ethnic identity and your racial identity in this case. So if you look at the percent of American Jews who are Hispanic, Black, Asian, or some other multiple race, so that would be a person of color, about 8% of American Jews define themselves that way. But if you added in people who are Sephardic and Mizrahi, that is claiming roots from Spain or claiming roots from North Africa and the Middle East, now you're up to 14% who are not conventional white European Jews. And again, you can break down the numbers a number of different ways. You'll also notice that the age makes a big difference. So those Jews of color, that was 8% overall, notice age 18 to 29 is 15% of that population. And 30 to 49, 12%. The older Jews are more likely to be conventionally white, but younger Jews are increasingly more likely to be Jews of color. So clearly there are non-white Jews, and that proportion is growing. These are the fruits of intermarriage, conversion, rediscovering their heritage, and also longtime communities. However, sometimes even what we might call white Jews, that is, Jews who would self-identify as white on a survey or who pass the eye test, I guess, sometimes want to claim non-whiteness. They say, we're targeted by white nationalism. White nationalists hate us, and so how could we count as white? Many white Jews are an invisible minority. They don't look different from the ordinary American white person on the street, unless they dress obviously Jewishly, if they wear a kippah. And sometimes people have experimented with what life is like wearing a kippah, wearing something that's visibly identifiably Jewish, and they sometimes find that life is different than when they were just dressing like everybody else. And Jews are targeted for hate crimes more than any other ethnic or religious group. So it's fair to say that we are not just white. Again, that off-white concept might be useful. And we certainly can point to positives like our historic support of the civil rights movement. Jews tend to be on the progressive side of the political spectrum. But sometimes claiming that we're not white is a way of dodging white advantage or privilege. And even trying to give ourselves an antidote to internalized racism. If you talk to those Black Jews that you saw walking through that conference and sharing some of their stories, they all have stories about going to synagogues and being othered in some way. Being asked, who are you with? Why are you here? How did you find this place? The assumption is they don't belong because they look different than what we expect American Jews to look like. So claiming we're non-white is something that we occasionally do, but the problem is it undermines some of the possibility of being an ally. Part of the point of being an ally is to say, I do have privilege, and I'm going to use it to help you, not declining to admit that you have some advantages. So what about that 92% of American Jews that are not also people of color in some definition? Are they allies? Well, by and large, American Jews tend to support racial equality and progress. They support inclusion and diversity. They offer empathy for experiences of discrimination. However, unlike the heyday of the civil rights cooperation in the 50s and the 60s, Jews and people of color, especially disadvantaged groups of people of color, tend not to live near each other anymore. Or we might have lived in the same neighborhoods in parts of cities, now we're not. It's not legal segregation, but it's de facto segregation. So I'll just give you the numbers for Deerfield and Highland Park. Deerfield is currently 81% white, 13% Asian, 2% Hispanic, and 1% Black. Highland Park is 84% white, 10% Hispanic, 3% Asian, and 0.5% Black. These are just two of our suburbs, but this is not out of character from other suburbs that I'm sure you're familiar with. And Chicago is far from the only racially segregated metro area in our country. Jews tend to trust the justice system and calling the police, where the experiences of some people of color can be very different. These different experiences can produce a lack of understanding and a defensiveness where we claim our non-whiteness, but that undermines our support for other groups. We've seen more recently conflicts over diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI work, because Jews have begun to raise the question, does DEI include Jews? We don't necessarily need advantages getting into schools, but do we need support facing hate and discrimination? Some of the recent campus events where those slogans of from the river to the sea and some things even more obnoxiously over the line were not stopped by administrations in ways that anti-LGBTQ language, anti-Black language, anti-Hispanic language, anti-trans language, those would have been stopped. So are Jewish students worthy of the same protections, or is DEI limited when it comes to anti-Semitism? And is that putting Jews versus African Americans? I mean, the visuals of those large donors trying to get people fired at universities, the university presidents made terrible statements or made terrible mistakes in their testimony. But the idea of Jewish donors throwing their weight around to get these people fired didn't look good to me. So what about the third possibility? What if American Jews are part of the white establishment? What if we are beneficiaries of structural racism? Well, there are poor Jews. There are Jews who don't go to college, even among non-Orthodox Jews. Overall, the demographics on socioeconomic standing for American Jews are generally positive. American Jews are twice as likely as Black Americans to have an undergraduate degree. They're 3 times as likely to have a graduate degree. Half of American Jews earn $100,000 or more, compared to only 1 in 5 Black Americans who earn $100,000. On the other end, only 1 in 5 American Jews and their households earn under $50,000. But half of Black American households earn under $50,000. Now, there's many reasons for this disparity in income and accumulated wealth. We know that the GI Bill, which was a major advancement opportunity for American Jews after World War II, was not always extended to African American servicemen to get the same opportunities. We know that redlining when it comes to home insurance and purchasing homes and neighborhood exclusions, including Deerfield, we must say, because we know that story from the 1950s, where a mixed race community was envisioned and the community went up in arms, bought the property, made it into a park, and refused to allow mixed race housing in Deerfield. This is not ancient history, you know, this is in the 1950s. So that was another factor in keeping these communities separate and not enabling African Americans to build the generational wealth that white Americans and Jews, for that matter, were able to do. Jewish culture emphasizes literacy and higher education, and it has for multiple generations. That's something that has taken longer to dig out of that hole for the African American community. And Jews had a historical cultural experience with business and commerce and capitalism. You're not being an anti-Semite to point out that Jews have made a living in business for many centuries, working in between and around the other professions that they weren't allowed to be participants in. If they couldn't own land and they didn't work as peasants, they worked in between the two, taking raw materials, processing them, selling them somewhere else, taking manufactured goods from the cities and selling them in the countryside. They were the business people. And when the capitalist revolution took place in the 19th century, Jews thrived in the new open economy, and they succeeded. Blacks were still slaves in America until the middle of that 19th century. And so when you see progress, when you see another group doing better, that can lead to suspicion. That can lead to concerns. It can lead to negative interactions. One of the major sources of tension in New York City is the fact that so many Orthodox Jews are landlords. They take the resources they have, they buy property, and they run apartment buildings and condo complexes and so on, because you don't have to work on Shabbat. If you're a landowner, right, you can collect every other day of the week, or deal with the maintenance issues then. But you can be your own boss, and then it works out well for you observing Shabbat, studying Talmud and Torah, and so on. But the landowner versus the tenant can often be a fraught relationship. And if you only see Jewish people as landowners, and you only see your African-American neighbors as tenants, it can lead to communal tensions. And there's been incidents of violence against visibly Orthodox Jews in New York, and sadly, it was not white supremacists that always did it. Sometimes it was these Black Hebrew Israelites or simply people with economic grievance that act out in that way. So now the most incendiary accusation, that American Jews are complicit or even active in white racism versus people of color. Now, you generally don't hear that in America or applied to American Jews in America, except for the wild accusations from the Black Hebrew Israelites or Farrakhan, Nation of Islam. You know, you will hear some of that stuff, but it really falls into the crackpot conspiracy theory department. But the key issue today is the synergy between the Palestinian cause, the desire for anti-colonialism to fight back against the legacy of European colonies, the assumption that most Israelis are whites from Europe, which actually isn't true. Over half of Israeli Jews now are from the North African or Middle Eastern population. They're Mizrahim or Mughrabi from North Africa. They're not white and they're not European. That's a little harder to fit into the easy categories that people are imagining. You see, what happens is, you see what's happening in Israel, even before October 7th and the aftermath. And you think what you're seeing is through an American lens, where you have white soldiers, white police officers, white colonists dominating a indigenous population of color. And so you figure it's just like Africa, it's just like the European colonies in North Africa, it's just like all those other cases of the white people oppressing the dark people. But Israel is complicated because many of those Israelis who came from other places have nowhere to go back to. It's not like they're French colonists who will just cross the Mediterranean and go back to France. Where are they going to go? Where are the Jews from Iraq or from Morocco that were thrown out and landed in Israel? Where are they supposed to go back to? The Holocaust survivors, where are they supposed to go back to? And their descendants. It is a native land for both peoples. And that's what makes it harder and complicated. What's happening in Israel? Is it discrimination? Is it apartheid? You can hear the racial overtones of that apartheid accusation. Is it a genocide? Is there an Israeli intent to wipe out the Palestinian people as a whole, like the Armenians or has happened to Jews? These accusations are thrown around. You can try to argue one way or the other. You can accept some of the truths of the accusations. My perspective is that what happens to Israeli Arabs is analogous to Jim Crow discrimination. There's segregation, but they're allowed to vote. They can earn a living, but they're a clear minority. The dominant culture expresses itself no matter what they would like to see. They have to sing a national anthem that speaks about a Jewish heart longing for Zion, which as an Arab Palestinian, I might not be so thrilled to be singing. Now, what happens in the West Bank, or in Gaza for that matter, before the events of October 7th, that may be legitimately considered apartheid, where you have settlements where Jews live with unique access roads. They live under a different legal system than the Palestinians who are under military occupation. The Palestinians have no meaningful voice in the powers that make decisions for them. They're in a different, as I mentioned, different legal system. They don't have security in their person. And so that might well be an apartheid experience in the West Bank, not the same as what's happening in Israel proper. Gaza is another story. East Jerusalem is another story with more complexities. And genocide, not every event with lots of people dying is a genocide. That's not just legalism. It's important to understand. We can still want a ceasefire if we don't want more people to die. But that accusation carries weight and inflames people, makes them not willing to hear. So we have this baggage. And some Black Jews are living in the middle. They're trying to educate their fellow Black people about the Jewish experience. They're trying to educate Jewish people about the Black American experience and those perspectives and how they came to that conclusion. They're trying to build bridges and educate. And there are some examples of US anti-racism and anti-white supremacy organizing that builds common bridges between the communities. But obviously, other tensions continue. And I was reminded just this week, I heard a program by a scholar at the Jewish United Fund about the various churches in the world and how they're reacting to what's happening in Israel. And the scholar said, we might have forgotten, but the Black community has not. What happened in 2015 when the first Black president was shown up in Congress by Benjamin Netanyahu over the Iran nuclear deal? Do you remember this? 8 years ago now. But Netanyahu, in an unprecedented event, was invited by the Republican Speaker of the House to come speak at a joint session of Congress to rail against the Iran nuclear deal. That did not predispose the Black community to be supportive of Israel and certainly of Netanyahu and his take on issues. That still rankles. That still has poisoned the well. So what are American Jews vis-a-vis the Black community in America? There are times that we are white, and there are times that we are not. And some of us are never white because we're Jewish and Black. We're Jewish and Hispanic. There are times that we are allies, and there are times that we are self-interested. There are times we benefit from white advantages if we are white, and there are times that we can support people beyond our experience. Can you be a colonialist in your ancient homeland? Can Jewish refugees from Arab countries be white oppressors? Despite our temptation to see the world in simple categories and to project the American experience of race onto the world, issues are seldom black and white. And the challenging relationship between African American and Jewish communities today is definitely firmly set on gray. So I'd like to ask if there are any comments or reactions or questions to this exploration, things that you've seen in the media or in the public square, or things that you've been thinking about vis-a-vis this complicated relationship. Yeah, Judy.
I think I'm unmuted. I have 2 African-American grandchildren, so they are Black. My daughter being Jewish, but the interesting thing is they live, because my daughter and son-in-law are international teachers, they live all over the world. So in Singapore, the kids, the big holiday was the Chinese New Year's. Then they moved to Dubai and they learned about the Muslim holidays. And it's just from place to place. They did spend some time in the US, so they knew about the Jewish holidays. I'm kind of wondering when they become adults, what direction they are going to, go in. I mean, right now they know Hanukkah. And in fact, I always ask them, are you celebrating Hanukkah or Christmas? And they always say, look at the calendar. Oh, we'll celebrate Hanukkah because Hanukkah is comes usually earlier than Christmas, and they know they're going to get their presents earlier from Steve and from Steve and me. So I think it's going to be interesting when they become adults of what direction these two Black children are going to decide what to do.
Sure. And also their experience traveling the world means they've had experiences in Africa where they're the majority visually, right? And that's a very different.
They were in Ethiopia. Yeah.
Right.
They were there too.
Right.
Yeah, I've just in a lot of progressive groups or Facebook groups and progressive friends that they're like, how do I put this? I don't know, like I feel like they're jumping on a bandwagon they don't really understand Israel. And in fact, this afternoon, one of my Facebook friends I don't know that well posted a meme saying, "Oh, there's this study that says there's no such the people who claim to be Jewish aren't Jewish, or the Palestinians are Jewish," and it's like, where the hell did you see that study? Well, I said it nicely, and I think I got through to her, but yeah, that's just something I've noticed, and I guess I didn't grow up Jewish, but now I'm experiencing it, and I have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
So I'd like to address a certain point that I find very frustrating right now, and that is that I'm torn between wanting to support Israel, but being extremely uneasy as to how the Netanyahu government is approaching what's happening in Gaza, and feeling that they are not being, shall we say, interested in the hostages, very much their safety, and that it's more of almost a revenge thing in some ways from the way that some of the right-wing cabinet ministers are talking and the way that they are. And I taught the Middle East many years at Northwestern. And quite frankly, I used the word apartheid when it came to the West Bank, because very often that was very much like what was happening in South Africa. And here we have settlers who are taking land, throwing people out of their houses, shooting kids, and getting away with it because the Netanyahu government's allowing them to do that. And so I find myself really torn when I read these things. Obviously, from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free is the same phrase that the Netanyahu government has used in reverse. And so it's problematical and as you say, extraordinarily complex. But in any case,
right. Well, and this is one of those cases where can you support the people of the country and not the government of the country, or can you support the right for self-defense but not going too far in attacking your enemies, and how far do you go? Part of our challenge is that we are dealing with this. Not you mentioned World War II when you lit the candles. We did terrible things to the German and the Japanese civilians during World War II, firebombing and awful things. We cared less about them than we did about us, and sadly, that's happening to some in Israel as well. There are some who are calling even for a ceasefire now, or who are emphasizing the hostages as a higher priority than killing Hamas. But there are others who simply don't want to hear it. Some of the survey data is very disheartening for how much more violence some people want to see visited upon Gaza, whether it's revenge or they see it as like a prophylactic cleaning out of Hamas to stop them from coming back. But at what cost? Even there was a special forces operation a couple of weeks ago where they rescued a couple of hostages, but the way they distracted the people in Rafah to get them was by bombing a couple other buildings so that everybody ran to help the people in the buildings, and then they were able to get in and save the hostages. So at whose lives matter in this case, at what cost do you save two people of yours versus the other people? It's a calculus that you can't win, but I think that Israel is losing. And just today, I saw a headline that said, fully wiping out Hamas is not a realistic goal, because the Palestinians still support the message. They still support the idea of liberation, and they're not going to blame Hamas for what Israel is doing. Israel tries to say Hamas hides behind a hospital. So if we bomb the hospital, technically it's a fair target of war because they hid weaponry there. But the people in the hospital see an Israeli bomb coming down and hitting the hospital. And they don't get into the subtleties, or they don't think about it. They blame the person who's doing the violence. So if Israel was hoping that they would blame Hamas for all the destruction that's happened, it's probably not going to happen. And so we won't see the kind of progress we'd like to see coming out of whatever ceasefire or reconstruction takes place in the future.
Historical anecdote. I graduated high school in the same class as Stokely Carmichael. My high school that at the time was 95% Jewish, white. And Stokely grew up in New York City. He's from Haiti. But his entire social set and his friends in high school were mostly all these Jewish kids. And in his writings from later on in the 60s, he wrote specifically that he had never met a white person he could trust. So the seeds of this go back a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And James Baldwin had essays about this. I mean, there's a long history of tension and positive cooperation. And so, one of the things that we have to think about, if you want someone to be on your side, it helps to be on their side. So if there's an issue that you could support that would get you to meet Black churches, leadership of Black communities, and show them that you're helping them with an issue of importance to them, then they might listen to you on an issue for you. But it's going to be a two-way street. It's not going to be do what I want you to do or else.